my name is Isabella, and today's Intern Whisperer tip of the week is practice thoughtfulness when organizing team bonding activities. It's not uncommon for colleagues to have meals together or to hang out after working hours for team bonding and networking purposes. Social activities outside of the workplace can help foster a sense of belonging and build professional relationships. Welcome to the Intern Whisperer, Jeremy. I'm really excited to have you as a guest.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, this is going to be a really great show. You're hitting a lot of the boxes for us on a lot of cool things that we're doing. So I love the fact that you're a veteran. Thank you for serving. And there's what does anybody say? It's like, you're welcome.
Well, I always say it's a pleasure to have volunteered. That's my default response.
That's good. That's thoughtful. You're going to talk about a lot of cool things with our guests, but we're going to go ahead and start with the way I typically kick things off. So tell us about yourself using only 5 words and why those 5 words. And so the first word, I had to practice this word for a little bit, enigmatic.
So enigmatic comes from the fact that I've always been a very mysterious person. So I think the Riddler, from the DC comics, the villain of Batman. I am a puzzle solver. I am very, I worked with cryptologists, cybersecurity analysts. I've worked in the National Security Agency. There's things that I've done that I'll never be able to talk about. And I think that makes me mysterious.
It does make you mysterious. So I'm making a little note here so I can come back and ask you about something because of things that you just said. All right. So your second word, bold.
So bold.
You're wearing red. You've got red hair.
Rocking the power color. Yeah. So even downrange. My nicknames were Lighthouse when I was in the Navy and Tracer Round when I was on boots on ground in Africa. Now, a tracer round, Geneva Convention said that if you're going to fire ordinances, it's important to light up one every couple rounds. So you're going to see if someone is shooting anti-air missiles or bullets, one of them is going to shine. They're going to be bright so you can see the direction of where those bullets are flying. That's all Geneva Convention and rules of engagement. I was that tracer. I stood out like a sore thumb. People would make jokes about putting.
Okay, you're very tall. Let's just say that.
I'm 6'5", yeah. So I would stand out, and I mean stand out a lot, literally, and pasty white. I'm a ginger. I've got everything going against me. If you put me out in the middle of the desert, 122 degrees in the shade, I was covered head to toe in our Army fatigues. At the time, I was stationed with the Army. I was working as a Navy, I like to say, a Narmy sailor. I was a Navy Army sailor soldier deployed out of ECRC, Expeditionary Combat Readiness Group, and they sent me out of San Diego to go deploy to Africa to what was Signals Intelligence Marine Battalion Africa, where I spent over a year there doing analysis.
Cryptologist. I'm still going to come back to that one in a little bit.
Okay.
You said calculated. Now that can have a positive or a negative meaning. What
It's
do
powerful.
you mean? Yeah.
So I was late stage diagnosed neurodivergent when I was 31 years old. My twin brother, was diagnosed at 10th grade. He was actually put on disability for a time for it, and what was then ADD, so attention deficit disorder. It took them the remainder of that time, whatever you want to calculate that in your head, 15 years for them to make that same assumption about biologically, even fraternal. We were twin siblings.
Not identical, fraternal.
We're fraternal, right? So the idea that I am able to do these puzzle solving things, these ideas, these aspects, there is a calculated thought process with everything I do. I'm always trying to think of the next step forward. Even in just mundane menial tasks, I will have so many thought processes going on in the back burners waiting to come forward. They'll just ignite. I'll solve a problem that I've been mulling around all day, and it'll come to fruition, and I'll have to stop everything I'm doing and work on that solution that I'll end up coming up with. And it's constant. I would plan months. I mean, I'm a great party planner. I used to work with Comic-Cons, including, MegaCon is this weekend.
Yeah.
Yep, that's coming up. I used to do that over in Sacramento and Hawaii, where I spent most of my time when I was not deployed, running things like OtakuCon, Honolulu Comic-Con, all these different pop culture places. And part of that was to get junior military out of the barracks and into those conventions without having to pay, because it's expensive to live in Hawaii. How do you get your junior military out there for some morale, welfare, and recreation? Well, you get them signed up to volunteer for a few hours so that they're left for the rest of the day. The military is providing the shuttles, giving them the transportation down off the mountain into Honolulu Central. And that was how my brain worked. I loved party planning. I loved doing logistics, security. That was a big part of my life for, the time that I was in.
So empathetic. Now I'm making still notes because I'm going, oh, twin life. We're going to talk about that too.
Yeah,
for sure. Empathetic. I like your words because they are definitely riffing off of another thing.
Right. Empathetic. So I spent, of the 11 years that I was in, almost 12, 9 of those years were dedicated exclusively to suicide awareness and prevention. The problem with my job field as a cryptologist, outside of nuclear engineers and air traffic controllers, cryptologists were the next in line for the highest number of suicides. And this is active duty. I lost a sailor almost every quarter. And that is heart-wrenching for me. These are 18, 19-year-old soldiers, sailors, recruited from their hometowns, solicited in whatever fashion or manner to join the military, either through, familial ties, or their family had served in the military. They knew that there were going to be chances for them to go to college. They came from poor families, and oftentimes being roped into this environment where they're unfamiliar and being told, well, you'll get to be stationed near your hometown. That's the biggest thing. The biggest, maybe inaccurate information is provided is, oh, you'll get a chance to be stationed by your hometown. And then they are sent thousands of miles away from anyone they know. Right. And oftentimes in these conditions, they'll get sent to the barracks, E1s, E2s, E3s. I was making at one point $540 a month, and that wasn't enough to really survive off of. But lack of access to transportation, even if there were events going on, the military tried hard to provide us with some sort of enrichment outside of our jobs, but it was difficult. So in those ties, mental health is a big issue, not just for military service members, but also veterans, especially veterans. But having to go out and deploy, go get stationed overseas, float around Gator Squares out in the middle of the coastline of Africa, just looking out towards land and seeing it and not being able to go there, it messes with you. Even getting stationed out in the desert, not having a quick access to a fast food restaurant, or nowadays it's a little bit less common, but if you're going down to forward operating bases, or you're going into the thick of things, you may not have access to some of those luxuries in life that you'll start to miss. Internet access was another thing too. If you're in the Navy, oftentimes your internet was cut off. There were times where you're doing missions and you couldn't send letters back home, so you had no idea what was going on.
Letters.
Or emails or anything. If you did send a letter, oftentimes it would get choked in the transportation back and forth between the various post offices, because we did have APOs and FPO, fleet post offices, Army post offices. I'm not sure if that's the acronym, but the APOs and FPOs you could send out and they would be held up a long time. So even those romantics who were sending out snail mail in hopes that in a couple of weeks your person would get it, we had internet access. So you could even send out internet emails. But oftentimes that could get choked. You would have to wait until your mission was over before those could all get sent out.
So they put them in like the outbox and they just stay there until you're in a place of neutrality, I guess.
Well, until the mission was done.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. How much was that budget? You said how much money?
Oh, how much was allocated to?
You said 1.5 million?
For which part?
I don't know, but you said something just a little bit ago, and I was going, what was that budget?
Oh, I don't know. I must have shotgunned something.
Yeah, because I was going, there was a budget. Oh, we'll have to go back and listen to it later.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, in post-production, because I can't go back right now. Anyway, there was a lot of interesting things that you brought up, but our last word, our last of the 5 words is service. I added this, service-oriented.
Service-oriented. Yeah.
It's a hyphenated word, so it counts.
Sure. And I came from a background of being a servant. I was raised in a conservative Christian home. I was raised on very traditional values. I was essentially brought up to be a servant. I was even as a man of the house.
It's consistent with being a military person. You're there to serve.
Right. And I had veterans in all of my elements of my family. There were my uncles, my aunts. I had a grandfather who served in the military. My stepfather had served in the military as a Marine. My stepbrother enlisted in the Marine as a Marine right before I did. I went in the Navy. Mm-hmm. So, you've got this service to community, a service to my church, a service to my country was just, it made sense at the time. And even to that extent, I take care of my friends. I take care of my family. If someone needs something, they always know that I'm a loyal person to ask for something. I have the truck to help my buddy move over a weekend, as long as he's bringing beer and pizza. We know that that's the rule. If we're going to go take care of a situation, I will load up whatever I need to load up and go take care of a friend. That's the idea of service, is that it's less about me. It's more for taking care of everyone else.
That is exactly consistent. And while you were saying that, I did a little bit of a search here for military slogans, taglines that were about serving. Strength and preparedness, be all you can.
Be all you can be.
Yeah, wings of destiny. Who dares wins. Do not give in to evil. There's all kinds of really cool things in every clime and place. I just like it. It's very inspiring.
Right.
Yeah. I will compliment you. I told you before we started, you have radio voice. I love it. It's super cool.
Yeah, thank you. So I worked as a cryptologist. So the majority of my time I did spend with cans with earphones on. So I had to learn how to talk and be able to enunciate, especially to senior level leadership. So I think that played into my ability to be able to speak. But I've also had a journalism background, public relations, you name it. So just being able to speak properly, I speak good, is kind of a requirement in our job fields.
So your last name, Gottschalk.
Gottschalk, yep.
Okay, where does that come from?
Gottschalk means God's clown, or God made a joke. It's German. It came from my stepfather. I was adopted when I was 8. What that means is that my stepfather essentially put his name on my birth certificate. I had no.
You and your twin were both adopted.
And my little brother. Yep, there's another one. So all three of us were brought into the fold of the Gottschalk family.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And, he was a teacher and he got chalk. That was the running joke. He passed away from diabetes. And we did not have a very close connection. I was literally a redheaded stepchild. But for the most part, I'm thankful for the opportunity I had to have a family dynamic where I had the upbringing of two parental figures that were there to offer me guidance and lead me, away from the chaos and calamity that can come from being such a high-strung, energetic, bounce off the walls, absolutely just monstrous teenager, as most young boys are.
Yeah, that is true. That was an awful lot of adjectives to describe, teenage years, and it is filled with angst. That's for sure.
Right.
I feel sorry because I think that just about everybody that was a teenage boy, their parents must have a hole in the wall somewhere in their house, because my brothers would go and punch a hole in a wall. And in further discussion of other men that were reflecting on their teenage years, it seems to be consistent.
Right.
A characteristic. Did you punch a hole in a wall too?
I was nonviolent. I was always pacifist. I didn't realize that until after I joined the military.
That's so funny. You joined the military. Totally opposite.
And I was an expert. I was expert twice over with weapons qualifications. I could shoot, something.
Two different things.
How many yards out? I knew martial arts. I was trained in Taekwondo, Tang Soo Do, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then MCMAP, which is the Marine Corps martial arts program. And so I knew how to hurt someone. I just didn't want to.
Well, that's the purpose of knowing those things, is how to keep yourself under control so you do not harm others.
Oh, everything about the military was to try to put me under control. That was the biggest reason for me joining, outside of the travel, outside of the college and education benefits. I needed to corral my energy level down because I was unhinged as a high schooler and needed direction. That's where I thought I was going to get it, was joining the military.
Was that also as an 8-year-old? Did you feel like you were really rambunctious?
If the correlation between my craziness at 8, I didn't actually want to go into the military until I was almost, probably 10 months before I did it. I'm very impulsive in that regards. So I was still in high school at the time, maybe 11th grade, before I started thinking about that. But as an 8-year-old, I think I was just.
Do you remember being 8?
There are definitely
I don't.
issues. Yeah, I have blackouts. I don't remember several years of my young childhood life. Call it trauma, whatever you want to deal with. But yeah, I don't particularly remember a lot of my youth. Maybe if I really, really thought hard, burst a blood vessel in the process, I could regurgitate something. But yeah, my youth, so young, so young back then. It's been so many years.
So I didn't know you do voices also. My dad, I speak with my dad about every other week. I need to get back into the regular weekly phone calls with him. One of the things we do is I love the stories, and I ask, he's my only living parent still. And I go, so tell me stories. I want to know stories. He goes, how come you don't remember any of these things?
Right.
And he said, was your childhood so traumatized? I said, actually, I don't know why I don't remember. I mean, I remember a lot as a child, but I don't remember what year and where we were. And so I said, write that down for me. Give me that. And
I think there's keystones. I think that, especially depending on how your brain works, especially with me coming to terms with neurodivergence, being late stage, it traumatized me. It's hard to look back and think that anytime you were ever spanked because you couldn't remember something, anything that someone put you under duress and you weren't able to do recall on those events, it was traumatizing to realize, hey, if I'd just been medicated properly, if I'd gotten therapy, or if I'd dealt with this a different way, that I might not have gotten beat, or I might not have, had the belt, or gone and pick a switch out from the yard. I think about that constantly, and it's not a regret necessarily. I can't change anything that happened. It's just the realization I had to come to terms with that as being just who I am. There are times where I was asked something. A stand at attention was a big thing with my stepfather, who told me, hey, stand at attention. You will answer these questions. And I wouldn't remember them. I wouldn't remember the answer because it had just been too stressful for me. Locked my knees, passed out one time, and it was a attention-seeking behavior. If someone had understood at the time that that's how I functioned, if that's how I thought, it'd been a lot easier to handle dealing with disciplining from my parent.
That's good stuff there too.
Right.
All right. So as we continue to go through here, educational background. Where did you go? If it was college, or how did you get to where you are now? So you can start at any point in time, whether you want to start at high school when you join the Army, or if there's a different point.
In high school, I was part of the journalism class. I was part of the yearbook staff. I was a TV productions as well. I did just about everything I could get my hands onto, as multi-potentiate, as they call us millennials, as I love to get my hands on everything. If there was an event going on, pole vaulting, cross country, soccer, I did it. I lived for most of my high school right across the street from the high school, so I could walk over there, and I often did. And that made all the difference to me. Going into the military afterwards was the expectation that I was going into an environment that was going to be public relations, journalism, what would be called a defense institute for education, primarily for journalism and media communications. So that was solely where it was based out of. Come to find out, Cryptologic Technician Collections, which was the rate and the job I was put into, doesn't do any of that. I was given a technical reporting job, not understanding at the time as a high schooler. Technical reporting is not journalism. That is sitting there at a computer, filling in data blocks to send out rapid response messages about activity that's going on. And that's very little of what the overall job as a cryptologist was. But it was a primary component, and that's how they discerned differentiating between the different types of cryptologists. Mine was collections. There were also interpreters, which were the linguistics. Everyone asked me, what language did you speak? I didn't speak any. I barely spoke English. That's a joke. I mean, I spoke pretty well. I spoke good, but for the most part, I didn't go into school specifically to learn another language. Korean or Chinese, Japanese.
So
Spanish.
Don't cryptologists break code?
We do. As part of that job, cryptologists, the difference between cryptographers, as much people understand, cryptographers is the idea of puzzle solvers. When you think of Alan Turing and the invention of, coincidentally, the Enigma, and what was called the Purple Dragon, I believe, at some point. You have all these different encoding programs and these enciphering machines that you had to have broken out during World War II, so as to to focus away from the puzzle solving aspect. The cryptologist, their job was to break communications, Morse code operators from the early days.
Okay. Most people know that one.
Yep. So Morse code operators then transition into signalmen or radiomen, and then eventually into cryptology, which is what moved into every element of cybersecurity and primarily the radio frequencies and the entirety of the spectrum of communications.
Rubik's Cube. You any good with that?
No, absolutely not.
I had to cheat.
I don't have the attention span for it, honestly.
I know. I would sit here and go watch people go, shh, they're shifting it all around. It's like really amazing what they do. But on the same hand, I went, you know what? You can just peel these stickers off and make it match.
Yeah, that was a thing between myself and my twin brother. Is stories from my cradle is that he was the engineer. He would go and build everything, and then I would play with it and break it, and then he would build it. And I don't know how that dynamic played into neurodivergence or neurotypical. But I knew systematically there is a set number of steps that you can use to complete a Rubik's Cube. I never had the interest to know how to do it.
Yeah, I don't either. I like other types of puzzles. People themselves, actually, they're the biggest puzzle. So understanding
absolutely.
people.
And I think that's one of my biggest fortes too, is just I crave understanding human interaction.
Did you take a lot of psychology?
I did. Study it? So surprisingly, most of my college education while I was in the military was while I was deployed. And I took American Military University. I took University of Maryland, University College of Europe.
You do that online? How do you do that?
They're called NC PACE. So they were Navy College Pacific, or some sort of a float college program, or I don't know what the P stood for, but NC PACE gave me an opportunity to learn these college classes while afloat. So they would bring teachers on board. Oftentimes they were truncated classes, so you could do things like English, math, whatever. While I was deployed, same thing. Army brought in people. Camp Lemonnier was the naval base. It's the only military installation of the U.S. in the continent of Africa, which is massive, size of China and the United States, all crammed into there. You're still not filling it. So just over in Djibouti, Africa, and while I was taking college classes, while working a 12 to 18-hour day, we would get off work, go do some classes, crawl to bed, wake up, do it all over again, 7 days a week.
It does sound very romanticized, the way that it's being described right now. And the word in literature, romantics, does not mean, like loving. It's different. It's just nostalgic more than anything.
Right. There's a methodology to it. I love my time overseas because in a way, that you hear from the negative side of things, it's institutionalized. You're essentially, it's not a prison, but you're in a very methodic place. You're expected to do X, Y, Z. You're told on the daily, wake up at this time, go eat. Your food is covered for you. You're not paying for anything out of pocket. You're banking all this per diem. You're making all this money from being
you could
hazardous zones.
As long as you don't spend it,
right.
You got money.
You save up all that money for a year so you could go and marry the first person that bats an eye at you and forget to put a down payment on a house, buy a fancy ring and a wedding instead. Financial woes are always something I hear about from military veterans as well, but you can make a lot of money being deployed. And I think that's one of the allures outside of the fact that you're in literal combat zones and danger zones at any given time.
So twin life.
Yeah.
What is that like? Because while you didn't share, it's unusual for a child to be 8 and getting adopted. That's very unusual. There's, I'm sure, a story there, which you don't have to share, but what's it like having a twin? Even though you're fraternal, do you actually sense things about, the whole identical
twin psychic connection?
Yeah.
I think at a very early age, we had a lot of nonverbal communications. There were little nuances. We could read each other's body language very well. My brother was always predisposed towards anger more than anything. His life was very challenging. He had a hard time coming up, just socially and otherwise. He does a lot with, he works primarily at one of the theme parks. He does a great job there. His job.
Is he tall like you?
He is. Okay. He's much larger.
Wow.
Yep.
You're pretty tall.
Right. Yeah. So size wise, he's bigger than I am, but he's actually 6'3", and he's as far as weight goes, he weighs a little bit more than I do. And he's scruffy. He doesn't look anything like me. He's got dirty blonde hair, whereas I'm, would be a lanky ginger, even though I'm told BMI wise, I'm actually overweight. The taller you get, the more challenging it is to hit those metrics, I tell you.
It doesn't matter. You can be short and it's the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to break out a salad every once in a while now as you're getting
Listen,
older.
This is all that matters for men. Oh, I think I want to lose 5 pounds. Boom, it's gone. That's all a man has to do. It's a little harder when you're on the female side of it, based on whatever the hormonal issues are. So it's a lot. It's a lot easier for you guys. Absolutely. Just because of the genetics there.
That's one of the things that my counterparts, when I hiked on the Appalachian Trail, that was a 3 to 6 month trip.
That's a whole story there.
2,200 miles. We walked it. I broke 2 of my toes in the process, still kept going. And all the friends around me were emaciated, but because I broke my toes, that meant I had to slow down, which typically is not something most of the men out there would do. They're outdoorsmen. They're competitive. They're enthusiasts, and they get to the mountaintop where they're supposed to be at Katahdin and Baxter State Park in Maine, climb up to the ridge, and they would just look emaciated. Look like something coming off Davy Jones's locker, or
a skeleton,
the undead, right? Because they had just shed every ounce. Huge calf muscles. I mean, we all looked like we were carrying tree trunks. And then coming down from the hill, no arm muscles whatsoever left, and we're still carrying our 30 40 pound backpacks, or if you're ultra light, you're carrying 18 pounds, whatever. But for me, I did it the conventional way, and walked off the war that way.
So if you're actually hiking that, what is it that you eat? You just eat whatever you find along the trails?
Essentially, it's a giant group of backpacking trips. It's 3 to 5 days before towns. I don't think I ever went a period. The Appalachian Trail is one of the most civilized trails.
It's hardy though.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Oh yeah. And it's a lot of ridges. You climb the equivalent of Mount Everest 16 times. And that's 10 million steps.
Whoa.
I of course played the was it Norah Jones song? I think it is. I walk 1,000 miles, whatever. Or I could walk. I'm gonna look.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up. I don't think that's Norah Jones, but
I played both of those. So like every milestone.
I'm looking it up. Yeah. So I'm gonna find it in just a minute.
So and in this case, I was coming out of I believe it was. I remember the town that I walked into. My hiker friends are gonna shun me for this, but came out underneath the bridge and had reached that 1,000 miles and was singing it in my head. It's the
I know exactly. It's on
Crews
my playlist.
Famous,
It is on my playlist. It says Jim White.
No,
that's not it. Yeah, I'm going. That's not it. The Proclaimers.
Pretty sure she's playing on a piano.
Vanessa Carlton.
Vanessa Carlton. There we go.
There you go.
Yep, yeah, it's Vanessa Carlton, not Norah Jones. It's Vanessa Carlton. So
yeah, I know the song because it's on my playlist. I don't always know the artist, but I know that song.
Blaring, mind you, this was in 2017 when I did this. So yeah, and I'm not the best at memory, but
that's okay. Not every memory has to stay locked in, right?
Yeah, no,
it's okay. We make space for whatever else.
Just the random trivia, right? For
exactly
Marvel movie nights at Ivanhoe Brewing and otherwise.
So did you like being in the military? Did you find it to be? How long did you serve?
I served 11 years.
That's a lot.
Yep. That's a lot. As many would say, I went over that curve. At 10 years, the decision has to be made between keeping it career or not. There was some wheeling and dealing going on with the Navy when I joined. So I did originally was enrolled for 4 years. As I went to my next duty station, I was incentivized to take up another training. And in order to do the training, they wanted 18 months out of me. That started at the end of my training. So then you added on a couple more years, and you added on a couple more years. You want to go to another duty station, you got to add on a couple more years. So you can say I joined for 4 years and I stayed for 11. And at that point, had some pretty traumatic stuff happen. We had Edward Snowden, the disclosure.
Oh yeah.
A lot of the NSA's networks and systems and infrastructures, midpoint collection and all that, being 5 desks away from him, and seeing all this go down. I did. I knew of him as a person. He treated my junior sailors very disrespectfully. I wasn't too keen on the guy, and I wasn't surprised when we had the disclosure happen. And ultimately,
he still lives over in Europe, right?
I'm fairly certain
he's not able to come back now.
No, and I think, and the thing was, is people glorified him for addressing an issue. The problem is with any type of military intelligence, there are risks. There are ways that could have handled, and many people would argue that he exhausted all resources. To that, I said no, because when you factor in things like human intelligence, where you have agents working overseas, trying to do what is basic national level security stuff, you disclose who their identities are, you put their lives and their families in danger. There's other ways to have done that. And when you look at the alpha personality type of that individual, you see why he did this thing was to garner attention. He wanted the attention. If he hadn't turned around and sold,
biopic on him also, right?
There's biopic. I think it was Jason Gordon-Levitt or someone portrayed him. I haven't seen the movie. I don't really care to watch it. But yeah, sitting a couple desks away from him at any time, and just never really saw him as just this, savior that everyone kind of wanted to paint him in the civilian world for addressing national security concerns.
So we've talked somewhat about mental health and the fact that you got a diagnosis later in life. That still perplexes me, to be honest, because I'm going, how could your brother have been receiving that diagnosis? And it sounds like, based on what you've shared so far, that there was some crossover. They should have seen that in you and figured, well, if they're twins, we need to check both of them.
We should have, And the same thing goes for, it's like any other medical consult. You bring your kid to the dentist. You don't check the other one. One gets braces, the other one doesn't. 10 years later, the other one's got the messed up teeth, and the one with the braces, is fixed. It's kind of that, just kind of missing the beat on that. It's you don't necessarily have to take all your kids every time one of them gets sick. So in that defense, it's just, you recognize there are a lot more characteristics coming from one person than others. So that's ultimately what came from that, was having to deal with a lot of the repercussions of not necessarily feeling like there was blame to be had on the part of my family, but just knowing that I missed out on that opportunity. I was the one ridiculed because I had really nice teeth going through high school, and all of my family essentially had braces at some point. So it was that was my gotcha moment. It was like, gotcha, got to be something wrong with you. Why not mental health?
We're going to take just a minute to acknowledge our sponsor, Cat5 Studios.
The Intern Whisperer is brought to you by Cat5 Studios, who help you create games and videos for your training and marketing needs that are out of this world. Visit Cat5 Studios for more information to learn how Cat5 Studios can help your business. Thank you, Cat5 Studios.
And we're back to the second half of our show. We've been talking about mental health. I'd like to ask you some questions, because we're going to pull some of these out and use them in another thing that we're doing, promotional, about autism and helping to raise awareness about what autism is. Are there some common misperceptions that people have about the autistic, and what are they?
Sure. I only found out recently that the word Asperger's. So Asperger's is a type of autism. Asperger's is used primarily, the naming convention was actually affiliated with the Nazis. There was a researcher named Asperger's who was essentially collecting autistic children, and were vetting them. The smarter, more productive ones were essentially kept, and then the ones that they felt like couldn't function were discarded. And I don't know the validity of this. I was only recently told about this, but they're saying in the general community they're no longer accepting Asperger's as the terminology for that hyperproductivity, hyperfocus, usually prone to heightened emotions. I have a cousin, coincidentally, who has Asperger's. He doesn't do well in society. He's also dealt with other issues, troubled past, and prone to violence. So it's one of those things where, even in that scope, you're then being put into a bubble. You're being put into a group, and you're being characterized by that. With mine, for instance, he can be just really good at puzzles. Okay, well, why are you so good at puzzles? I don't know. It's the way my brain works. Maybe you see the world as a vector model, whereas most people see it as a list. So you have your top priorities in your life. You hold up your hand. You have 5 fingers, and you can name off the highest priorities. It doesn't matter if you start with your pointer finger or your thumb. You're going to name them off by what's most important to you. Somebody with an autistic brain in a vector model, they can have singular as their energy can be kind of like the palm of your hand, and it'll just branch out. It doesn't matter where you start with your fingers. You can just start putting them down one after the other, and they don't necessarily have to have a high priority or not. It's just how much energy you divert to them. So at any time, it can be different. And that can be used in any element of any thought process, from romanticizing partners to trying to organize to-do lists. The big thing you always hear about is with autistic people is they're supposed to write lists. You always tell them, write lists. Yeah, I have 20 lists scattered throughout my house that I have not looked at since I've written down on them, because I lose them, or I just misplace them, or object permanence. Once they're out of my sight, they're out of my mind.
So lists are not helpful to them.
Not in the way that most people think. Why don't you just organize yourself? It's the method by organization that most neurotypical people think are okay. Neurodivergent people, we just need something a little different. We need something that motivates us, gets us jump started. There are times where people will talk about fatigue. I get this fatigue that stops me from being productive today. And you get that burst of energy. You don't know when it's coming, but it's that burst of energy where you can just go through and be super productive. Well, there's an imbalance there, obviously. You're going through something. It doesn't necessarily have to be sleep deprivation. It doesn't have to be your eating habits. It literally can just be mental fortitude. And it's understanding that people all have different levels of compatibility when it comes to the amount of stress that you can take on. The irony for me is that I function in high stress environments, but I don't really function in them. I thrive in areas where it requires me to be, for lack of better terms, powerful. I need to be assertive. I need to be dominant. I need to be in control of situations. That's a very military characteristic for a lot of people, veterans especially, where we always can take over and assume control of a situation. We've been taught. Being in that position is in itself stressful. So if I've taken that role on, it's a little too difficult for me, I can start backpedaling. And I try to catch up, try to maintain that level that I may have had when I was in the military, or at some point in my life where I felt like I could handle all that. We never give up. Military veterans, they'll never give up. They will keep smashing that wall until it comes down. And that's an obstacle. That's 9 years of therapy does, is you rationalizing you can only do so much. And that's a big part of that, even in relationships, and particularly with relationships. We had an 85% divorce rate in the Navy. You got married, you got divorced, and it sucks. It sucks to think that you're going into a situation where your odds they're not favoring you at all. But just the fact that you're going through things like deployment, you're going to combat scenarios, you're going through experiences
that's really hard on relationships.
You won't be able to share with your significant other. Even in working in a top secret environment, I had to go home and I talked about the junior sailors and soldiers. I talked about their growth and their development. My partner didn't necessarily want to hear about it. They didn't want to know about my kids, the people that I was helping, raise and carry through their military careers. Yeah. It was really all I could talk about. I couldn't talk about the job.
Yeah. That's frustrating.
It was.
So do a lot of individuals with autism, Asperger's, do they have to take medication?
Yes. Yeah. One of the ways to handle it, there are particularly compounding things with, multiple, you have bipolar disorder, BPD. You've got a lot of military veterans, especially women, are coming out with traumas, be it sexual trauma or PTSD. Military men also are coming out with PTSD. We're only learning now that men are starting to use the resources at hand to talk out their issues. There are a lot of people who argue that, well, back in World War II, men were tough. No, it just meant they didn't communicate. And that was the issue, shell shock or otherwise. PTSD manifests in all kinds of ways, in different forms, from sitting with your back to a wall so that you can survey the room that you're in and note all the exits, which people are left or right foot dominant. I do that. I still do that to this day. I know which hand someone's going to eat with. Usually I know which side their good eye is. Typically not in a attack manner. I don't always think about like, how would I disable this person? I'm not super spy, like that kind of person, but it's just how to get away from a situation. You want to know how to exit. I've had most recently, a couple months ago, I walked into a bar, just a local bar. We had just done this was actually Valentine's Day. It was Valentine's Day festival. I was walking around with a friend, and I walked into a bar and the light hit me a certain way. It was a strobe kind of light, and I blacked out for about 3 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yep. and I wasn't drinking. I hadn't had any drinks. I just walked into this bar. I subconsciously sat down, was hyperventilating, couldn't get my breath. So I stood up to try and go to the bar to get water, realized I couldn't do that in the state that I was in, went to the bathroom. I don't remember any of this. Like, I don't know that I did this. This was some friend conveying to me. Went to the bathroom, wiggled the handle, realized I couldn't get the door open. So then the next step was to navigate outside. Somehow didn't hit anybody, didn't interface or cause any conflicts with anyone, bump shoulders, whatever. It was just move myself out of that situation. When I got outside, I started breathing, and I slowly remember just looking and seeing my friend's face staring at me, being, "What are you doing? What do you need? Can I help you? What's going on?" And luckily, fortunately, I had a resource. I had a support that was there at the time. I don't know what I would have been like had nobody been there for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not characteristic. That's not something that regularly happens for me. And the other issue is I'm medicated for stuff like that. So it's weird.
And that means that you're not supposed to drink.
Right. Oftentimes they tell you not to drink. And like I wasn't consuming alcohol at this event. I was just hanging out. And it was the strobing factor. It was this XYZ.
It's kind of a little bit like epilepsy.
Kind of like an epileptic episode that causes me to black out. And I didn't have a stroke. I didn't, still had motor function. I just detached from that situation and was able to navigate my way out of there. And I hope it never happens again. But it was one of the first major.
Was it scary?
I would say, yeah.
In hindsight, right? In
hindsight, looking back at it, I would say it's probably more scary coming to. But afterwards, I just kind of knew how to handle it. I mean, I've lived in the woods for 6 months. I've woken up in the middle of the night with a bear staring at me. There's scarier things in the world, but losing control of your body is definitely up there. It's definitely up there.
Sounds more like sleepwalking.
Almost.
Because you're conscious.
Yep.
Not really conscious of what's going on, but you're able to function just like what you're saying. There's a word for it, I'm sure.
And I don't know if it's related to PTSD. I don't know if it's related to some sort of neurodivergence, synapses in the brain, eating spicy fried food. Who knows what caused it? But these are all things that I somehow tie, I believe that it's related to my military service, exposure to burn pits in Africa, injuries I may have sustained while I was deployed on a ship, getting beat around on a heavy storm night, whatever, any number of injuries I could have sustained while I was serving, carrying that out with me, now realizing these are things I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. So it's important to talk about them.
There is a really good book. I'm looking it up right now. And it was something that I read when I was in college. And it's called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, yes.
It's really good.
Right.
I would recommend you read it. I think that for anybody that has served in the military, they'll find it very, very cathartic. It's a series of little vignettes that Tim O'Brien, he served in Vietnam, and he pulled from, different people that were stationed with him. And what he does is he says, so the helmet, this is something that we wear. And he says how much it weighs. And then this is the things that the soldier carries, whether it's a gun, a helmet, your backpack, the clothes that you're wearing. But there's also the things that are not visible to the eye. You carry a picture and it's in your wallet or some type of a cross or whatever. And then it's just even the memories that you carry with you. Really good book. It's actually something that people can download and read. Highly recommended. It was extremely impactful. It left a really big impression. I was trying to see how I could bring that into the classroom when I was teaching high school, but it was adult stuff for sure.
Sure. And I think especially with older generations, you still hear, I go and I teach, I speak, I do talk with young, like Gen Z, new generations that are coming up, especially those that are just coming out of high school. I'll often go and speak with them, either colleges or otherwise, and do, talk about war and PTSD. And I will sit with them and discuss, well, how do I communicate with my uncle? He's very cold. He's very quiet. He doesn't like to talk about his experiences in the military. And honestly, it's a recurring theme is that you've got a lot of veterans. So oftentimes they'll sit in their room. They'll sit in their room, stare at a wall for hours and hours and hours, and go sit on their reclining sofa and stare at a TV screen and not be able to relate, not want to talk about their past experiences. not want to deal with a lot of the trauma of things that we've done. And I'm lucky. I've always wanted to communicate. It's been a passion of mine. I think my neurodivergence helped me with that. Is that even struggling with things like PTSD, I'm somehow able to communicate while I'm in those states to get out of them. I still have a fight or flight response. I'm lucky. I'm very lucky to be able to come from that, because I know that, especially with the number of veteran suicides, I know we specifically still talk about 21, 22 deaths a day. I don't know the relevancy of that statistic. I know it's broken up a little. It's a little bit of a fallacy. It's not necessarily right on the money, but there is one is too much. One suicide
Even
a day
one, yeah,
is too much. And I think that we're getting there. Unfortunately, the reliance on the VA, the Veterans Administration, for those healthcare resources, psychology and psychiatry, to get those resources from people, even for me to go and get regular appointments, they're few and far and in between. But
they're hard. I shared with you my brother's contact information. Hope you guys were able to connect too.
Yeah, we did, and we talked at length, and it was good to connect. And it's amazing, even the age difference. There's a slight age difference. Is that we were able to still share a lot of the same experiences when it comes to being a veteran, when it comes to putting in for things like disability claims. And I think that's important, is understanding so many veterans get out and they don't think that they deserve mental health resources. They don't think they deserve to get some sort of extra compensation to offset the cost of what it would take for them to deal with day-to-day life coming out of the service. I think that's really important.
It is. He's like Superman to me. So he's up there. And that I think I told you, he's like Dos Equis. So
yeah, such a warrior, most interesting, veteran in the world.
Yeah. Well, he's one of them. That's for sure. There's others. All right. So we're closing into the end of the show. All right. 2030. What do you think that's going to look like? Because I know that you're going into this space of consulting, and your specialty is in marketing. And you shared earlier, before we got on the air, that you had a TikTok video, right? That was how many million?
It was 4.8 million views.
That is crazy.
Yeah, a couple that are several 100,000.
So what do you think 2030 marketing is going to look like?
It's all Internet of Things. It's all networking. It's conferences. It's connection. It's really just who over what I think it's still going to stay that trend of I was talking with people working theater production, graduating out of Valencia College and then moving into full theater production at great paying jobs locally, because they're who they knew coming out as alumni. I think it's going to stay that way. I think that, especially military veterans, the understanding is that there's often a disparity between understanding military veterans have unique skill sets that may not be easy to put on paper, or if it is, you're trying to weigh the fact that someone has that doesn't have that on paper education that everyone's really stressing about. I call it real world experience. I've talked to enough human resources, hiring managers and otherwise, who want to reinstate, it's amazing that you have this great military experience. I really wish you just had more real world experience. It's a slap in the face to anybody who served and gave 11 years. 11 years is a career. Millennials these days, and that's my age group, we don't last jobs. Statistically, we're on rotation every 2 to 3 years. We're looking for new opportunities to survive and last, even in the military, for that long. That's an accomplishment. I think
significant.
That's something people should look at. It doesn't matter what the gap between the time you served and when you got out. You show commitment, and I think that's important, especially with being able to maintain something like, with my case, was a top secret security clearance. All these requirements, these vetting processes, regular trainings every year that you had to do, and make sure that you weren't breaking the law when it came to handling things like sensitive information.
So the trend is that people starting even now in this decade moving forward will have at least five different careers. So your military life was one career. You could be and you were an esports.
I was an esports shoutcaster.
That's a second career path.
Right.
Marketing consultant.
I've done millions of jobs. Yeah. If we look at it that way.
Yeah.
I've been a professional hiker. I was a hiker for a long time. I would lead hiking groups out into the mountains of Hawaii.
So you were a guide.
I was a guide. Yeah. And I loved it. I taught the history of the Hawaiian lands to a lot of junior military and a lot of civilians. Allowed them to network and be able to become friends that they had, junior military with access to, once again, referencing back to the MWR, creating environments where morale, welfare, and recreation can be met by having civilians go and pick up these junior militaries at their bases and go out and have a life, go out and learn about the culture, learn about Hawaiians, or that largely the Southeast Asian population that now dominate the island of Oahu is 32.8%, I think was the demographic when I was there. 32% of the population is Southeast Asian, is people that have moved towards the islands. The same thing for, if you're military, 800,000 of the 2.8 million that were out in Hawaii at the time were military based, or were military logistics or dependents assigned there for helping with that giant military infrastructure that comes out of Pearl Harbor, Wahiawa, all those forts that are out there, Kaneohe at the Marine Corps base. So it's just about getting out and learning more about where you're at, where you're focusing on, and being a guide was a really good thing for me. I used to lead people out to the sandbar. I drive boats out to the sand. I got licensed to be a boat operator. I'm in the Navy. I love the water. So I would do scuba trips out to Electric Beach, guiding on, I called it the barefoot hikers because we'd go hiking in the morning. And then at the end of the day, we'd be on a beach, barefooted, walking out in the water, just enjoying life. And I loved it. And from esports commentator, I ended up hiking the Appalachian Trail. That was after a divorce that was not unexpected, but I'd gotten out of the military to kind of work on it. Didn't survive. I was enrolled at the time as an editor-in-chief of the newspaper, as well as going to school full-time at University of the Pacific in Stockton. Became editor-in-chief of their college newspaper. Really turned it around, I feel like. And then even now, I work in a capacity of, I drive, I drive around in Uber. I do Uber. I do journalism. I do editor-in-chief of the Valencia Voice. And then I'm writing, I'm blogging, doing podcasting, doing everything.
Yeah. So there you go. More than 5 career paths. All right. So best mentoring advice that you would like to share with our listeners, and why?
Fail daringly. That's something I learned in my acting class. I do stand up and improvisational comedy.
Every time there's like a new career.
Yeah. So I do stand up, and part of that is dealing with PTSD. Improvisational comedy lets you just spit things out.
Is that at SACS?
It was at SAC. Yeah, I did work with what Wayne Brady became famous at SAC Comedy Lab. I worked out of there. I've also hosted a lot of open mic nights. The idea being is that with PTSD, you want to be out of your headspace. You want to be kind of impulsive. You want to do whatever you think is going to happen. That can be whatever, especially a military. We tend to have a lot less filtering when it comes to interacting with what we call civilians. So if you're doing stand-up comedy and you blurt out a word that may be inappropriate to an audience, you have to understand that may not fly. But in the process, you're also learning more about yourself. You're failing. You fail daringly. Don't be afraid to try something, a new food, a new place, a new experience. I still get somewhat apprehensive about walking through doors that I don't know what's on the other side. I still get very anxious being around large crowds of people, but I have to work to overcome that. So even if I can't be in that environment for a long time, I failed daringly. I've given it my all. I've tried my hardest to make it work. And I think even with you're learning new hobbies, new interests, knitting's not for me. Duolingo, I've tried a number of times to learn new languages, and I failed daringly, but who knows? Maybe there's that one time that you'll succeed and you'll reach that point where you have, that pat on the back where it'll be just enough to show that you've done all you could. You've reached that level. You've finally found something that clicked, and it made life all the more better for you.
That is really good advice. Okay. So how can our listeners contact you? We always supply everybody's LinkedIn profile. So that one you gave permission, but email, website, I know that you said that earlier. Why don't you go ahead and share it with our listeners?
Yeah, I've got a couple things going on. Barefoot Hiker is my social media account still to this day. I don't really do a lot of hiking on it, obviously, but Barefoot Hiker is my social account. That's more of a personal one.
On what social account?
On any of them.
Okay. Look for it on any social channel.
Right. So just Barefoot Hiker. It'll be under, Jeremy, and big giant ginger redhead. And the same thing for my TikToks and all that. I do funny content creation, a couple of thirst traps, just be forewarned. Nothing too, lascivious, but I like to get out there and have a good time. And I think that's what it's about, going out of your element and just doing what you like to do. And if people support you, that's where you're going to get the biggest fan base, is those that really nurture, your creativity, your productivity.
Right.
And I always tell people, no matter what, if you put out a bad video, you still fail daringly, right? So that's all part of that growth. So Barefoot Hiker, Instagram and Twitter and everywhere else, and Facebook. And then I think Barefoot Hikers Worldwide would be my Facebook one. I think it's pretty inactive right now. That was specifically for my hiking stuff. But once I move over more into the consulting, you'll find me pretty easily on there.
All right. Well, thanks so much. I'm very glad that you were able to come in and share all of this great insight. It's going to be super good. I know I'm going to continue to have conversations with you on other things that are related. Sure. And I look forward to seeing you at PodFest.
Right.
That's coming up. So
in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Now this show will air after PodFest, so our listeners know that. So you can always go back and find us either at PodFest or certainly here on your favorite podcast streaming channel. So Jeremy, thank you so much. It's been a joy.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to our sponsor, Cat 5 Studios. Thank you to our production team and video interns, Christian Flowers and Daniel Conti. Music is by Sophie Lloyd, and our sound engineer is Eric Peterson. Please visit Employers for Change at www.e4c.tech to learn how you can create real diversity and inclusive culture while upskilling your people for the future of work. Thank you for listening to the Intern Whisperer, and follow us on your favorite podcast channels.